Mom and Dad gave me permission to move in. If you don't like it, call the police. My older sister Hillary smirked provocatively. In front of me stretched a room in complete chaos. My once immaculate sanctuary was trampled on as if it were nothing. My name is Kate, and I'm 31 years old. I'm an interior designer who made her name in Miami. In my teens, I threw myself into the world I'd always dreamed of, worked relentlessly, and eventually built my own design firm. Now I design for South Florida's elite, steadily expanding my business. My success is embodied in my second home overlooking South Beach. It's a minimalist white space adorned with art and furniture collected from around the world, a sanctuary that fills me with endless inspiration. But I wasn't content to stop there. My next ambition was to expand to the West Coast, to Beverly Hills. Opening a new design studio and gallery would be a huge investment, and it required serious capital. So I made a practical decision. I would rent out my Miami penthouse and use the rental income to fund the expansion. Once the plan was set, I acted quickly. First, I asked Steve, the property manager I trusted most, to find the perfect tenant. Then I instructed my attorney to draw up a flawless lease agreement that would anticipate every possible risk and fully protect my rights as the landlord. My motto has always been, in business, everything comes down to paperwork and contracts. To ensure the property was in top condition, I renovated the interiors and installed a state-of-the-art security system. A few weeks later, the penthouse gleamed like a luxury hotel suite. I was confident it was ready. All that remained was to find the right tenant. At that point, there wasn't a single doubt in my mind. I had no idea that someone who would trample all over my sanctuary was much closer than I thought. My parents lived peacefully in the Florida suburbs, a typical middle-class couple who didn't quite grasp the scale of my business. One weekend, I visited them to tell them about my plan to rent out the Miami penthouse to fund my West Coast expansion. Mom, Dad, I've decided to open a new studio on the West Coast, I began. So I'm going to rent out my Miami place for a while. My father squinted proudly. That's amazing, Kate. I'm proud of you. But my mother frowned slightly. Rent it out? To strangers? That beautiful house? Isn't that dangerous? Don't worry, Mom. I'm using a management company I trust, and my lawyer's involved too. Everything will be by the book. That's when it happened. As if she'd been waiting for her cue, my sister Hillary walked in with her 3 kids. She must have been listening outside the door. Kate's renting out her place? She said in a mock-surprised tone. The kids instantly turned the living room into chaos, jumping on the sofa, demanding snacks. Yes, it's for business. When I said curtly, Hillary's face lit up as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Oh, perfect then. You can rent it to us. Her words were so casual, so unguarded, that for a moment I couldn't even process what she'd said. To you? Right. Our apartment's way too small now that the kids are growing up. And your penthouse is in such a great school district, isn't it? It would be perfect for the kids' education. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. In her mind, the story was already written. She and her family would live in her little sister's luxury penthouse for free, while her kids enjoyed top-tier schools. I calmly, but firmly, brought her back to reality. Hillary, this is business. The rent is part of my investment plan. Hillary's eyes widened dramatically, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Rent? You're seriously going to charge us rent? Her voice rang through the room, and even the kids stopped moving for a moment. My mother immediately took Hillary's side. Kate, how can you say that? Hillary's your only sister. And look at her, she's got all these children. You could at least help her out for a little while. Help her out? What do you mean? Mom, this is my property, my business. It's not a charity. My voice came out colder than I expected, even to myself. My father furrowed his brow, trying to mediate. Now, let's all calm down. But once Hillary's temper was lit, there was no stopping her. She put her hands on her hips and glared at me, like some self-righteous heroine standing up for justice. Kate, you just don't understand. You have no idea how hard it is for a normal family to raise 3 kids. All you ever think about is making money. You've never had to worry about grocery bills or tuition the way we do, have you? Her words were so unfair they almost made me laugh. She had no idea how hard I'd worked, how much risk I'd taken to build the life I could finally have. And she never wanted to know. In her eyes, I was nothing more than the lucky little sister who makes easy money. You wouldn't understand. Hillary's voice cracked into a shrill, hysterical pitch. You live alone in your fancy apartment, doing the job you love, making tons of money. What's so wrong with helping your family a little? And now you're telling me you want to charge your own sister rent? You're so greedy, Kate. You're heartless. Greedy? I repeated the word slowly, as if hearing it for the first time. I could feel the blood rushing to my head, a heat that blurred my vision. I wasn't angry anymore, just stunned by how absurd it all was. My mother spoke next, driving the knife in deeper. She's right, Kate. You're in a position to help your family. That's what family means, doesn't it? God wants those who have to share with those who don't. God? I almost laughed out loud. What they were doing wasn't generosity, it was self-righteous dependency dressed up as virtue. I stood up quietly. That's enough. This conversation is over. My decision stands. I turned to leave the living room, but Hillary's piercing scream hit me in the back. Don't you walk away from me, you ungrateful brat. That family meeting hadn't been a discussion. It was just an exhausting, pointless assault on my patience. A few days later, Steve from the property management company called. Kate, great news. We've had several inquiries, but there's one couple in particular I think would be perfect. Both doctors, solid background, excellent references, and they absolutely love your design. Would you be willing to meet them and show the place in person? It was exactly what I'd hoped for. A pair of doctors would be ideal tenants. Responsible, respectful, financially secure. Of course, Steve. Set up the appointment, I said without hesitation. The showing was scheduled for Friday afternoon. At 2 p.m. that Friday, I met Steve and the Fords in the lobby of my penthouse building. Dr. Ford was a calm, refined gentleman, and his wife exuded intelligence and grace. The moment we shook hands, I knew they were the right fit. This way, please, I said, confidently pressing the button for the private elevator. As we ascended, Steve explained the building's advanced security systems, filling the space with polite conversation. This second home means a lot to me. I designed it right after starting my firm. It represents the beginning of everything. Standing before the living room door, I placed my finger on the smart lock. I'm sure you'll love it. A soft click sounded as the lock disengaged. With practiced grace, I opened the door. Please come in. But my words froze mid-sentence. What spread out before me wasn't the serene, immaculate space I had so carefully crafted. The Italian glass coffee table that should have been in the center of the room had been shoved aside, buried under a half-empty cereal box and a milk carton. The pure white leather sofa was covered with a garish cartoon blanket, and the floor was littered with colorful plastic toys like landmines. And in the middle of it all sat Hillary. Wearing sweatpants, clutching a bag of potato chips, she was watching a loud kids' cartoon on the TV. Beside her, little Mia, the youngest, was scribbling with crayons across one of my prized art books. I heard Steve suck in a sharp breath behind me. The Fords stood frozen, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Kate, what on earth is going on here? Steve's voice was calm, but I could hear the disbelief behind it. Hillary finally looked up, noticing us for the first time. But there wasn't a trace of guilt or embarrassment on her face. If anything, she looked mildly annoyed, as if we'd interrupted her afternoon. Oh, Kate, you should have called before coming over, she said, perfectly composed. And in that instant, I felt something inside me snap. Hillary, what are you doing here? I couldn't keep the tremor out of my voice. I didn't know whether it was anger or bewilderment. What, like it's not obvious? She popped a chip into her mouth and said it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Mom gave me a spare key yesterday, so we moved in. You're going to rent it to us, right? A spare key. Right. I'd left one spare at my parents' house for emergencies. My mother had taken it, without my permission. From the kitchen, the other two children peered out. Their hands were smeared with chocolate. One of them was dragging my prized cashmere cushion across the floor. At that moment, Mrs. Ford spoke quietly. Steve, I think we should take our leave today. Her voice was cold, laced with disappointment and discomfort. Wait, Mrs. Ford, this is a mistake. I tried desperately to stop them, but it was already too late. Dr. Ford gave me a look of sympathetic but clear refusal. Yes, let's do that. Steve, we'll wait to hear from you, he said, and the couple quickly moved toward the elevator. The people who were supposed to be my ideal tenants had just become witnesses to the worst moment of my life. Steve turned ashen and said, "Kate, I'm so sorry, but I need to go back to the office and sort this out. I'll contact you later." Then he left as if fleeing. A storm of minutes passed. The living room was left with just me, Hillary, who kept watching cartoons as if it were someone else's problem, and the kids. The silence only amplified my anger. I turned slowly to Hillary. "Get out." "Huh? I can't hear you." She put a hand to her ear in an exaggerated act. I said, "Take your kids and get out of here right now." Hillary set the TV remote down and grinned. It was the most ugly smile I'd ever seen. "No. Mom told me it was okay to live here. This is our home now." Then she delivered the line that settled everything. "And if you don't like it, why don't you call the police? Go on, if you can." That provocative remark and her triumphant, twisted smile were the final trigger. Watching Hillary's smug expression, I felt an odd calm wash over me. My boiling point had long passed. Only an ice-cold resolve filled me. I stared into her eyes, reached slowly into my handbag, and took out my smartphone. "So, what did you just say again? You told me to call the police?" "Yes, I did. Like you'd ever actually do it. You'd never turn your own family into the police, would you?" Hillary still clearly believed I was bluffing. I ignored her and tapped the screen without hesitation. Then I dialed 3 numbers. 911. At that moment, the smile disappeared from Hillary's face. She shot up from the sofa and rushed toward me, panic-stricken. "Wait, are you serious? Don't—" I didn't move. On the other end of the line, a calm operator's voice answered. 911, is this an emergency?" "Yes, it's an emergency." I kept my eyes on my sister as I spoke clearly. "There is an unlawful entry. My second home in Miami, South Beach, has been entered without permission by multiple people. They're refusing to leave. They are not armed." While the operator confirmed my name and the address, Hillary tried to grab my arm. I shook her off. "Please, Kate, stop. Say you're joking." Her confident tone was gone and replaced by a pathetic tremor. The children, sensing something was very wrong, began to cry. "The unit number is 2501. I will be waiting in the building lobby for the officers," I told the operator, then ended the call. I stood before frozen Hillary and said quietly, "You told me to call the police, so I did. This is no longer a family matter, it's a legal one." I turned on my heel and left the room behind, the sound of crying children and Hillary's shrill screams echoing after me. My hands trembled slightly as the elevator descended to the lobby, but there wasn't a trace of regret in me. I sat on a leather sofa and waited. About 10 minutes passed. There were no sirens, only the quiet swish of the automatic doors opening as 2 solidly built police officers stepped into the lobby. I rose, approached them, and calmly presented my ID while explaining the situation as briefly and clearly as possible. They listened in silence. When I showed them the digital copies of my ownership documents, the older officer, Sergeant Jackson, nodded. "Understood, miss. Would you please take us up?" We rode the elevator back up together. Even from the hallway, I could hear children crying and Hillary's hysterical voice on the phone, no doubt calling our mother for help. I unlocked the door with my keycard. The chaos inside was unchanged. When Hillary noticed the officers, she froze, then stammered, "What the hell? You really called the police?" Sergeant Jackson spoke first, his tone calm but firm. "You must be Hillary. This is Kate, the legal owner of the property. We received a report that you and others entered and are staying here without her consent. That constitutes trespassing." "Trespassing?" "I'm her sister. We're family." "Family or not is irrelevant," the younger officer, Sergeant Brown, replied. "The owner has asked you to leave, which means you have no right to remain. Please gather your belongings and vacate the premises immediately." The moment she heard those words, something inside Hillary seemed to shatter. Suddenly, she lurched forward as if to throw herself at me. "This is your fault. You're ruining my life." Her eyes burned with hatred. But before she could touch me, Sergeant Brown grabbed her arm and held her back. "You're interfering with police duty." Despite the warning, Hillary began to thrash wildly, trying to wrench her arm free from the officer's grasp, her movements frantic and unhinged. "Let me go, you monster!" Her resistance only made things worse. Sergeant Jackson moved in to assist, and within seconds, they had her restrained and in handcuffs. Trespassing and obstruction of justice. You're under arrest. Hillary stared in disbelief, as if her mind refused to process what had just happened. She screamed, cried, cursed, begged, all in a jumble of words that made no sense. Her 3 children stood frozen, horrified by the sight of their mother in handcuffs, while one of them wailed uncontrollably. The living room was pure chaos, like a scene from hell. I simply watched in silence. I felt no sympathy, no pity, only a cold certainty that this was inevitable. She had sown this herself. As the officers were about to lead Hillary out, my phone rang sharply. The display read, "Mom." I didn't need to answer to know what the call was about. I pressed accept and switched to speaker mode. "Kate, what have you done? Hillary said that the police—" "Oh my God." My mother's panicked voice filled the room. I looked straight at Hillary, dazed and handcuffed, and answered quietly but firmly. "I just did what Hillary told me to do." She said, "If you don't like it, call the police." So I did. This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't given her the spare key without my permission. "What? Are you blaming me now? You just abandon your sister when she's in trouble?" "She's 38, Mom. A grown woman, a mother of 3. She's responsible for her own actions. And you may have meant well, but look at what that kindness led to. You turned your daughter into a criminal." I could hear my mother gasp on the other end of the line. Hillary stared at me, her face drained of color, eyes wide with despair as the officers flanked her. "You will never again step into my life or touch my property without permission. From now on, you and Dad will take full responsibility for Hillary and her children. Our little family game is over." I ended the call. Turning to Sergeant Jackson, I said calmly, "My parents will come to pick up the children right away. Here's their number." I handed him the contact information. The officers nodded and escorted Hillary out of the apartment. When they were gone, only the children's confused, frightened cries echoed through the room. I knelt down and spoke to them as gently as I could. "It's okay now. You don't have to be scared. Grandma's coming to get you soon." Mia was still sobbing at my feet. All I could do was gently stroke her trembling back in silence. They weren't to blame. Their only crime was being born to a foolish mother. About 30 minutes later, my parents arrived, pale and breathless. My mother rushed to the children, gathering them in her arms as they cried. My father stood frozen, his gaze shifting between the wrecked living room and my face. Anger, disappointment, and perhaps a flicker of fear clouded his expression. "Kate, what have you done?" His voice was thin, as though forced out through clenched teeth. "What have I done? I protected what belongs to me, according to the law," I replied evenly. "What's wrong with calling the police on trespassers?" "They're your family." "I've heard that word enough for a lifetime." I cut him off. "Have you ever once stopped to think about how much I've had to sacrifice for your so-called family? Hillary became the way she is because you both enabled her, spoiled her, protected her from consequences, taught her that everyone else would clean up her messes. This ends now. You'll take the children. You can also pay for her lawyer." My mother glared at me over the children's heads, her eyes full of hatred. "You're no daughter of ours." The words should have pierced my heart like a blade, but strangely there was no pain. Instead, I felt something close to relief, as if a heavy chain I'd been dragging for years had finally snapped. "You're probably right," I said quietly. Then I turned my back on them. My parents hurried out, shepherding the children toward the door. It closed behind them. Silence, real, absolute silence, settled over the room. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the chaos they'd left behind. Toys scattered across the floor, chocolate stains on the sofa, crinkled candy wrappers tossed carelessly around. It looked like the remains of a sickness finally purged, the rot that had festered inside something called family. That very day, I called a locksmith and had every lock in the house changed. I would make certain they could never set foot in this sanctuary again. Then I took out a stack of garbage bags and began to throw everything away. Every toy, every piece of clothing, every trace of them. The next morning, I called David, the property manager. He sounded mortified over the phone. "Kate, I can't apologize enough for what happened yesterday. I already reached out to the Fords personally to smooth things over, but I'm afraid—" "I know, David. Regaining their trust will be difficult." I cut him off mid-sentence. But my decision stands. You've done enough. If you think it's better for me to find a new management company, I'll understand. Absolutely not, he said, his tone firm. Kate, your composure yesterday was admirable. I won't lose a client like you over something like this. Please, let me handle it. I'll find you the perfect tenants this time, and I'll take full responsibility. His professional, steady words brought me a small sense of relief. There were still people in this world who valued reason, who respected contracts and boundaries. And that small fact soothed the raw edges of a heart scraped open by family. From there, I moved quickly. Within a week, I flew to Beverly Hills to finalize the lease on a property I'd chosen for my new studio and gallery. I had more than enough capital to move forward without relying on the rental income from Miami. It was proof that I could stand on my own, that I didn't need anyone. A few weeks later, I was in my new office in Beverly Hills, sitting with the design team and discussing the interior plans, when my phone rang. It was David again, his voice alive with excitement. Kate, we did it. I found the perfect tenants. He explained that the new renters were a couple from France, executives at a tech firm who had just relocated. They loved the house at first sight and offered to pay 1.2 times the market rate, 2 years in advance. Steady income, a flourishing business on the West Coast. And above all, freedom. Freedom from being drained, manipulated, or guilted into servitude. Everything I had fought for, everything I had ever wanted, was finally mine. About 6 months had passed since my new life in Beverly Hills had found its rhythm. One afternoon, I received an international call. The name flashing on the screen was Aunt Diane, calling from Italy. Among all my relatives, she had always been the most thoughtful, a woman who had built her own independent life in Europe long before it became fashionable. She was the only one in the family I truly respected. Kate, darling, how are you? I saw your new studio in a magazine. It looks absolutely stunning. It had been a long time since I'd heard her bright, lively voice. After a few minutes of polite small talk, her tone softened, almost hesitant. I heard a little about what happened in Miami. You must have been through a lot. It's over now, Aunt Diane, I said, keeping my voice steady. I know, but would you listen for a moment? It's about Hillary. According to her, Hillary had avoided formal charges. Prosecution was suspended, given it was her first offense and she had young children. Still, her life never truly recovered. The story of what happened spread quickly through the family. Relatives who had always lent her money or offered help quietly pulled away once they learned the truth, that the police had been involved, and that it was her own selfishness that caused it all. No one's willing to step in for them anymore, Aunt Diane said gently. Apparently, even her landlord had heard about the incident. After complaints from neighbors, her lease renewal was refused. Even your parents, concerned with appearances, no longer coddle Hillary as they once did. In the end, they ended up moving to a small, rundown apartment on the outskirts of Miami. I listened in silence. Strangely, I felt no anger, no satisfaction, only calm. Kate, you did the right thing. Her voice was gentle, yet filled with quiet strength. You are not obligated to sacrifice your life for the sake of a chain called family. You have every right to protect your happiness, to build a life that's truly yours. Don't ever forget that. Maybe those were the words I had been waiting all my life to hear. I no longer think of the Miami house as a sanctuary. It's just one of my properties now, a part of my business portfolio. My real sanctuary lies within me, a place no one can invade or claim. Blood alone does not make a family. True family is made of those who respect your life and stand beside you, not on top of you.